Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Chinese Medicine Podcast. This is Marie Hopkinson. I'm a Chinese herbalist and an acupuncturist. And we're going to do a little live stream Q&A this evening, or this day if you're in the UK. I'm just going to get things finally set up here. So if you've got a question, this is your time to ask a question. If you'd like to ask a question, now's a good time to ask one. You can ask it in the comments and the chat of this. I'm just going to make sure we've got the audio all good. So I hope that you're doing well. If you're in the other side of the world to Australia, it's probably starting to get to be your spring soon. And in Australia, we're starting to get autumn, although it's very, very hotter here this week in Perth, where I live. It's much hotter than it should be, I think. We're still experiencing some summer, let's just say that. And that brings me to this discussion of the changing of season, time and preparation. So just a reminder for people to, maintaining health, and it's easy to get sick in this kind of a time. So especially if you're in Australia, and like some people on this stream maybe from eastern states, it's probably cooler there already. So how do we prevent getting sick in winter is by suiting the following kind of season. So in autumn, you don't have to do no exercise, or very little like you do in winter, but you don't want to be really facing, you want to taper it down a little bit and not facing the wind and the environment, as much as you would in summer. So if you've been pretty active in summer, now's the time you can kind of be a bit kinder on yourself as the season progresses. It might not be sort of straight away. I'm just checking the audio on this. Going to go through an ad. Probably don't need that aircon on now. So yeah, still using the aircon. It's still it's still hot in Perth. It's still warm. Okay, great. It's working. Cool. All right. So questions and answers. So I'm going to start with something that I have had a question in a question, and then I kind of sometimes when people comment on the questions, I can't see the comment if it's if it's not straight away, and not because I'm not going into every video and checking them. But YouTube just introduced a new feature in the studio on the phone where we can see the replies in order of most recent to replies, like replies you haven't responded to or something like that. So that's really cool, because sometimes people ask a question and then I ask them something follow up and vice versa. So someone asked this question about iron supplements and building blood, and they basically the question was, can iron supplements build the blood? So it's better than nothing at all if that's your only option. But there is a difference in Chinese medicine between a food, the whole substance, and the compound involved. And it's exactly the same thing as herbs and drugs. So a lot of drugs come from herbs. They come from plants. They come from, they extract the active ingredient, the medicinal substance out of it. So there's iron in meat, and I'm not sure exactly, there's different ways of extracting iron, and especially if you're a vegan, there are less animal-based ways to get iron. But essentially, there's other things in those foods that your body needs, that Chinese medicine thinks your body needs, that's going to benefit from having that product as a whole versus having that as an individual substance. So what I would suggest, and this can be hard because sometimes people have such a low iron that they might need to supplement it for a while, but then long term, if you can not supplement it with artificial supplements, but you're getting that from your diet, that's perfect. You also have the issue for many people that they can't absorb the iron, and that's where working on your gut health with a herbalist, an acupuncturist, I've just got to raise up this microphone a bit, even a naturopath, whoever's going to help you in that way, that can be very beneficial. Maybe by having a less taxing kind of diet would help, where your spleen chi's healthier, happier. That may help your digestion a lot, and then your supplements might work better. So yeah, the answer to that is it can, but it's not as good as the original food. So the blood tonic foods in the plant world tend to be things that are black, blue, not brown, dark blacks and blues kind of colors. And the things that are, those things are like berries, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, even figs. They can have some component to that, some. Excuse me, that was a weird sneeze, like a reverse sneeze. They can have some affiliation to that. And things that are dark red tend to have a tonification of blood. They have a natural affinity to help blood. So that would be red dates in Chinese herbs, which is also a food. You can buy them in China as a food. And most grocery shops sell red dates. They're so delicious if they're not too dried, like if they're fresher than if they're the fresher dried ones, freshly dried. And then you can also get all, blood tonification from pretty much all the meats, and even white meats and things like that can have blood tonification. But if it's a red meat, they tend to be the highest, right? So, that's how we would think about that. All right. So we've got a question. I've also got a question that I want to answer just up front in the stream. Before we get people jumping in. I had to do this really long-winded intro today because I wasn't ready. And I was like, okay, I'll just put that on and get the party started without me. So I'm not sure if that helps YouTube find people to view, or it dissuades them when people turn on. They think, oh, that's stupid timer, I'm not going to stick around for this nonsense. But I'm here eventually. So, yeah. What I want to talk about quickly is like how when we treat dampness, one of the ways we treat dampness in classical Chinese medicine is by tonifying yang. Now, this might sound a bit weird, and it doesn't mean that everyone who has dampness needs the yang to be tonified, but like I often see patients that have come from a TCM background, like a practitioner from a TCM background, and the TCM practitioner will say you've got dampness and spleen qi deficiency, or pretty much they might not mention the spleen qi deficiency to them. They just say you've got dampness. And they do have dampness, like they do have the TCM symptoms of dampness. Hi, Nasisha. Cool. Hello. Welcome. They do have the symptoms of dampness, what are those symptoms, right? Foggy headedness, cloudy headedness, feeling lethargic, very, very wanting to lie down, but not necessarily sleepy, just not enough energy. And heavy limbs is a big part of dampness. And then you've got the soggy sort of stools. I'm going to say soggy, like looser bowels or sticky bowels, just maybe not even loose, like as in that loose, but on that side of things. And then you've also got all these symptoms, not so much of dampness. I mean, bloating can be dampness, but then when we're thinking about this abdominal distension, that's often actually spleen qi deficiency. Now, alongside of that, when how would I know that someone's yang deficient? Ultimately, their pulse diagnosis is going to tell you that, because if you just had dampness and it was just from the environment, like as in you lived in a damp house or you worked in a damp environment, it's often come into the channels, like into your limbs, and you can still have that heaviness, and particularly in the joints, some people can have that kind of dampness there. But if it's come from your lifestyle, or like we call it taxation, right? It's come from you working a lot, long hours, not being able to sleep well enough. This isn't just one night. This is over and over and over and over. Being stressed, like a lot of people have to work more than one job just to not even pay their rent, like just to not be homeless. Like it's a really hard life for many, many people, not just in Australia, but many countries. It's just terrible how it is right now. And that can also come along with a sense of like there's a difference between working really hard and achieving something and thinking, yes, I've achieved it, now I don't have to do this forever, and I've achieved the thing, versus working really hard and you're dog tired and you feel like you haven't achieved anything, you're just treading water. And that causes that mental taxation, right? Because you're just like, when does this end? This is just mad. Like, I'm so tired. How can I can't keep up with life. I can't, that kind of stuff. And if you've got symptoms these are not symptoms of dampness, but I often see these patients have these symptoms and their practitioner maybe hasn't explained what that exactly means to them. So it's not wrong. The practitioner's not wrong. They do have some dampness, but that's not all that's there. Now, not every patient I have has this again, but I do see this commonly. And so I'm going to get to the difference in how we kind of treat it, because this was a question that someone has asked me. So, oh man, I've got to grab something real quickly. So I needed this, my little plant, right? Because we're going to need this for the example in a minute. I'm going to put that somewhere. It's not going to be right in my face, but sort of in my face. Okay, so when you've got tiredness where you need to sleep in the day, or you could easily sleep in the day, or you're very sleepy, that's not just dampness. That's a deficiency kind of tiredness. Like, you're already at that level, and there can be worsening degrees of that, whereas how tired you are. And often people in that kind of tiredness, they don't feel better from that sleep. Like, sometimes if you're coming down with a virus or you're a bit sick, and you might have a day where you just need to lay low a bit and you sleep a lot that day, but then you come good. Like, then by 2 or 3 days later, you come good. That's not what I'm talking about. Often that is external dampness, right? Like, there's in Perth where I live at the moment, there's a gastro bug going around. I've had quite a few patients with that kind of problem, those kind of symptoms, and that is dampness. Like, that's a dampness situation, but it's not a chronic thing. Like, those people aren't going to be sick forever with needing to lie down and be sick and be there's a lot of nausea and vomiting that kind of goes along with that. Anyway, what I'm getting at is, how do we treat this thing? Why does this yang tonification work? So I've got this little pot plant here for a reason, right? And this is a great plant. This is a little copper pot that it can just sort of sit in separately to look good. Pop that over there. And this is its little soil. Now, what's great about the soil thing is it's got a drainage at the bottom here. So plants need two things essentially. They need light, they need sun, and they need water. I mean, I've killed many plants, but this one seems to have not been killed. It's lasted quite a while for me anyway, and it's thriving. It's looking good. So if I put too much water in this, and that's how I've learnt my lesson, that dipping this plant in my water. If you give them too much water, then that can just as easily kill them than not enough water. And what will happen is, if it doesn't have any drainage, right, you're just putting it in a lid with no holes at the bottom, it gets what you'd call waterlogged. So the water just sits there, and that is the representation of dampness. So the rain comes down in that nature, in life, and it goes in and it moisturizes, but there's this kind of a drainage. Now, in nature, when does that not happen? Well, when there's a flood, right? There's just water. The soil is waterlogged, and then you've got a layer of water over that, and the soil's overcapacitated with its water. Now, if we did that to this plant, if I poured this water in here, and I'm not going to because I'm my microphone things are on the bottom of this, but if I did, I've got holes here, and the water's going to come out of the plant, and it'll be happy days, right? Now, even if I water that too much, even if I've got these drainage holes, and I put too much water in it, I do that. Let's say I do that every day. I know this plant doesn't like to be watered every day; it only needs it once a week. What would I do? I would have to take this to a warmer place. I'd have to take it outside and let the sun dry the soil. So there's two ways to get rid of, there's actually three ways to get rid of dampness, but in this scenario, there's two ways. We can drain the damp, which is to poke the holes in the bottom of the container so the water can come out, or we can dry the damp, where we can put it in the sun and we can let not so much the leaves, but the sun will dry the soil, and it dries up the residue water. So when you take damp treating herbs, most of what those are, now not all of them, but most formulas are draining damp, or what they call transforming damp kind of herbs. And the yang tonic herbs are actually the drying. They actually are more the drying of the damp. Now there's some others. There are some herbs that just treat dampness, that are drying damp, and they're not yang tonics. But in this analogy, I'm likening the idea of the drying of the damp to the sun. So that means those herbs, sun is the affinity to yang, and they have to be warm. So that's a big difference when you see a classical Chinese herbalist. They definitely, that's just their bag. They use a lot more warmer herbs than in TCM. Now, one of those herbs, and the best example formula I could give you about this would be like ganjiang, which is dried ginger. Now, there's many more yang tonic herbs that are used, but that herb particularly kind of is used when people have looser bowels and they're a bit deficient, they've had gastro or something. There's a formula called Li Zhong 1, and that formula kind of is combining with herbs like baiju, which dries up the damp. There's only 4 herbs in that ingredient. It's a pill that it should be. A 1 means it's a pill in that herbal formula. And there's sort of like the example of we've got the sun and we've got herbs that like kind of dry up. It's basically strongly drying up the damp. It's not a formula that kind of drains the damp. It's a formula that dries up the damp. Because if a person's like weaker, they're more deficient, you don't want to drain the damp on them all the time, because that might make them feel worse. Because where does the damp go when you drain it? Like they're going to urinate more, or they're going to have their bowels going more. Probably they're urinating more. And for a weaker person, that will deplete them if we make them do that too much. So yeah, sometimes with most diagnoses that Chinese medicine practitioners give, as in most patients Chinese medicine practitioners see, there's more than one TCM diagnosis used, like more than one pattern of disharmony going on at once. It's very, very common. So what a TCM practitioner would see as spleen qi deficiency, and then they're still going to tonify, but they just don't warm as much. So they use different kinds of herbs that tonify the body. And this is often why people will still get better. Like there's still things that TCM does that's good. Like I used to practice TCM for many, many years, and there's stuff that it can do, right? It doesn't do nothing. Otherwise, no one would be still practicing it. But in cases where people are colder in their nature is colder. Not that they're a cold-hearted person, but their yang tends to get more deficient. They are a more deficient type. They're probably going to ultimately benefit from those warming herbs much more than they will from just the qi tonifying herbs that aren't so warm. Anyway, that's a little story about that. So we've got a question here, which is great. So we've got that's a great question actually. And I've got a little video about this somewhere on the channel, but now there's too many videos to find them. So I'm going to put this up on the screen because this is a really great question. And I like, on one hand, I do like your question, and why I like it so much is because ginger is one of the easiest food herbs to get. Like it doesn't really matter where you're buying your ginger from in terms of countries and things like that. It's the same ginger. Like ginger is ginger. Whereas with some herbs, different species and things like that make it hard to sort of say, oh, just go down the supermarket and get some. So Nasisha asks, is there a difference in the use of fresh or dried ginger powder to use for dampness if we add it to tea? So yeah, there's a big difference. Now here's the difference. Dried ginger is what is used to tonify yang, and it's much, much warmer. It's hotter in its nature, and it's more used for when you're a deficient person and you've got diarrhea. So if you had the runs, you had gastro, something like that, and you had lots of loose diarrhea, you'd want the dried ginger. Okay. If you've got spleen qi deficiency and you want to try the use of ginger, you would want the dried ginger. What's the fresh ginger used for then? So the fresh ginger is better for these other 2 reasons. One is if you are sick with a cold or a flu, fresh ginger is pungent, which means it's going to make you sweat. If you have enough of pungent flavors, now usually a cup of ginger tea isn't enough to bring on a sweat for somebody. Okay, that's why we don't get the ginger sweats just from 1 cup of ginger tea, right? In Chinese herbal medicine, they would use 9 grams of ginger in a formula, which would be about a thumb of ginger, maybe a little bit less than a thumb of ginger. And you would really, really boil that, but then you'd have 9 grams of guaja, which is cinnamon. You'd have other herbs in there. So you'd have at least 2 pungent herbs. Ginger and cinnamon are often used together. I'm talking about if someone's got a cold or a flu. If you don't have those other herbs and you've got the cold or a flu, I don't think that the dried ginger is really going to do much for you in terms of a cold or a flu. It's not going to be enough, because what you want to treat with the cold or a flu is you need to make appropriately. If you're not sweating, you want to open the pores so that you can sweat. That's the first process of a cold or a flu that your body's trying to do. Right now, you do have some types of people that are a bit more robust, a bit stronger, or the pathogen might be a certain type of a pathogen when they got sick, and they don't sweat at all. They're not even sweaty a little bit, and a cup of fresh ginger is going to do bugger all. It's not going to be enough to make them sweat. Could you try it? Yeah, it's not going to make you worse to try it. But don't blame me and think, oh, I was getting sick. Murray said take a cup of fresh ginger and I didn't get a sweat. You might need a lot more stronger herbs, and this is one of the Chinese herbal medicine's best time to shine, especially if you are a classical Chinese herbalist. We have a whole textbook just about the treatment of colds and flus and different formulas for different things. So if you've got a cough, if you're not sweating at all and you're very shivery and you're cold, shivering, you could try the ginger, but I don't think it's going to be enough. You need to get down to your herbalist or call your herbalist and get those herbs ASAP that you need, because there's stronger formulas that you would need to take. And what you need is varying. Now, the second thing that fresh ginger does, so dried ginger does one thing and fresh ginger kind of does 2 things. Like in a home use setting, in a clinic setting, they can both do different things as well. The fresh ginger stops nausea, so it helps your stomach work better, and that sounds very educational. The way I said that, helps your stomach work better. It promotes the exact function that your stomach should be doing. So when you've got nausea, what happens is your stomach is actually ascending, not descending, the energy of the stomach. So if the stomach energy doesn't descend, it doesn't just do nothing. It sits there and then it starts to go up, and that's when you get nausea. And if it's going even further up, you might get reflux, like a burning acidic regurgitation, or you might get vomiting. So if there's any of those kinds of symptoms, we often use fresh ginger. Now, if you had the diarrhea and you had the nausea, can you use both? Yes, you can. You can use the dried ginger and the fresh ginger together. Right, and they'll both, and in some Chinese herbal formulas that I give, I do that. We'll give both of those things together. If you had constipation, you don't want to use much dried ginger, really, like something else is going on there to cause the constipation. If you have normal bowels and they're on the looser side, probably dried ginger is going to be fine. But if you're constipated and you can't go, and you put a lot of warm stuff down there, like hot, warm herbs down there, that's where the dried ginger is going to go. It might dry it too much, and then it might be even harder to poo to get it out. So hopefully that answers your question. It's a good question. So I usually recommend you have fresh ginger in your fridge at all times when you go to the shops. I know it's a bit expensive, but it's a really good self-help emergency use herb, emergency food. There's lots of times where people feel nauseous from different things, right? Morning sickness is another common thing. Ginger's used a lot for morning sickness. And this is one of the reasons why I think morning sickness tablets don't work as well as the tea, because the tablets surely can't be fresh ginger. Like, this is one of the herbs where if I have a formula with fresh ginger and I have boiling up herbs I give my patients, if I don't have fresh ginger in the clinic, and many herbalists don't, they just have to tell their patients, go down the supermarket and buy the ginger yourself. Like, heaps of herbalists do that. They just don't, they don't have it there, right? Now, because I mean, to buy enough to use for your clinic. If you're not, it depends. Yeah, it can. You're gonna have wastage, right? Another way thing you could do is grow the ginger yourself. Like I've watched these little permaculture people show you how to grow it, so you can buy the ginger from the shops, and there's little nodes on the ginger that you look for that they've got, and then you can grow your own. What I'd suggest you do is if your ginger's kind of looking on the drier side, then just cut it up and dry it. So then you've got your own dried ginger. And then it's cheaper to make that, right? So you could buy the fresh ginger, slice it up. If you've got an air fryer, you could put it on at a very, very low, heat, or what they call it, a dehydrator, something like that, and just dry it yourself or dry it naturally in the sun and then grind it. Like in Australia, we have these little coffee grinders you can buy. They're just little ones from Kmart, our, little store, Kmart, which is like a Target, they sometimes call it. And they're about $15, the coffee grinders. They used to be $10. Now they've gone up to 15. That's inflation for you. And they don't last that long if you use them a lot. So you just got to make sure you don't burn them out because they're not designed for commercial use. But what I use them for is if I need to grind something very quickly and I don't want to pull out my big giant grinder that's really noisy and, industrial grinder. It's literally what it is. And I've recommended this to other people. Just use that. Some don't use a coffee bean grinder. That's a specially expensive one in case you put herbs in it and it snaps the blade, because sometimes they can if they're not designed for it. But yeah, you can make your own dried ginger, and you can buy dried ginger powder, and I'm sure it's okay, but we don't know what they've done to it, how they've, I don't know. I'm less and less trusting of these things that I see nowadays. And just be aware that if something's dried and something's fresh, you generally need less of the dried than you do of the fresh. So just for a reference range, for most herbal formulas, not all of them, the ginger dose for the fresh one would be 9 grams, and the common regular dose of the dried ginger would be 6 grams, right, within the formula. So what that's saying is, the potency of the dried is much more than the potency of the fresh in terms of grams. So you might find you don't need very much of it, because what happens to something dried, it concentrates all the nutrition and all the things there. Yeah. All right. Does anyone else have other questions? Let me know in the chat where you guys are tuning in from. What country are you from? Where are you from? Yeah, be nice to get to meet some people. I'm just going to get this question off the screen. Yeah. I'm a bit late with doing the stream today, so this life's busy. But yeah. I'll just have a look here. I've got some other things to answer. Let's have a look. Yeah, I've got some ideas for some videos coming up. I'm not going to go into this too much, but I'm thinking of... Someone asked me to do a video about Chinese medicine and like Christianity, that kind of thing. Like, is it okay for Christians to have acupuncture? And I've thought about this a lot in the past. I was thinking about doing a video on it ages ago, and then I just, got off track and off topic. So I will be doing that at some point. It's that I'm just going through my notes here with people's questions that I write down to do. Spleen chi deficiency and your emotions. That's another video that I'm going to be doing. So just sort of talking about how emotions affect and essentially dampness, how emotions affect your digestion, your digestive health. So that'll be an interesting one. Oh, hi Ripley the cat from Brisbane. That's awesome. In sunny Brisbane. From Victoria, Nasisha has another question. How does TCM see if your periods are late? around 10 days and no chance of pregnancy. Well, that's good to make sure. That's obviously a big concern. Firstly, if it's late and you might be pregnant. But if that's not the case, then yeah, there's two things that we think about with that. Well, not only two things, but two key things with your cycle. So I'm just going to put your question on the screen here. Obviously, blood is needed for a menstrual cycle to actually make the lining. But in Chinese medicine, qi is needed to move the cycle. So if a cycle doesn't come on time, it's literally two reasons as the main reasons, right? One is qi is stuck, like TCM patterns. I'm not sure what you guys' familiarity with all this stuff is. Some people are really into Chinese medicine. They know all the pattern names and stuff like that. They'd call it liver qi stagnation. So literally like energy stuck. So you need qi to be moving in your whole cycle, but for different things, but particularly to move the period, right? And if qi doesn't move, you'll generally have these sorts of symptoms like as well. So you'd have like sighing, person going like that. Some people get a lump in their throat, feeling like stuckness in their chest. The fact that qi moves, it stops you from getting PMS, really bad premenstrual symptoms, or and you know, worse and worse than that. Like there's disorders and things like that where people have, you know, really, really dark thoughts and things like that, and worse than that before their cycle. And there's nothing, they don't get those thoughts any other time. It's just only then. There's also just feeling with breast distension, like feeling that your breasts are really heavy and painful. Like, you know, you touch something and it's like, oh my God, it's so painful. It's really hurting me. And that's all to do with qi movement. Like if qi was moving smoothly, there's a big chance that stuff wouldn't be happening, right? So for some people, it's not blood deficiency, it's just qi stagnation. And usually what will happen, like if I see a patient that hasn't had a cycle for a while and we're trying to get their cycle to come on, which like they've got what we call amenorrhea. Now, if you haven't had your cycle for 10 days, that's not amenorrhea. But let's say it doesn't appear and then the next cycle doesn't appear. So you haven't had 2 periods or, you know, something like that. Then you might be like, okay, there's no period there. Or often I see this from people when they've stopped taking the pill, the contraceptive pill, and the cycle just didn't restart. If they do a session of acupuncture, just like one session, and the period comes on, there's a big chance that the cause of that was qi stagnation. Because it takes more than one treatment for acupuncture to make any effect on tonifying blood. So if it's blood deficiency, that's the other possible cause. It means the body doesn't have enough resource there to make a period. So it's like literally putting things on hiatus, on hold. Now, from a biological perspective, you often see this happening in a stressful scenario. And you know, biologists think that this is like part of the protective mechanism of like, well, the last thing, if you're going through a really stressful time, physical stress as well. So this happens to athletes and things like that, where they're really, really pushing their body. They're demanding a lot of their body. Or it could be mental stress. So something suddenly has happened that it's really, really bothering you. And your body goes into a state of suspension of the cycle so that you wouldn't get pregnant. Okay, in the old days, like in the caveman days, then women used to all be in the same area, and like in the village, and the men would come upon those women and impregnate them all because they'd be all on their cycle at the same time. Like you've probably heard that before, that women's cycles all sync up if they live in the same house, and you know, pheromones and things like that. Especially in those times, they didn't shave underarms. Pheromones kind of, you know, is part of the smell that comes out of your body, and like a signal, you know, part of your body odor. And that will linger more on your armpit hairs. And that's why if you live in a house with lots of women or few women and they all don't shave their armpits, they're probably all going to sync up their cycles more quicker than like if you live with natural people. that don't use deodorants or don't use things like that, they'll probably all sync up together much more quicker than the ones that do use all those things, because like perfumes and stuff like that, that just masks, you know, it interferes with your, what do you call it? I forget the word, but yeah, you get the idea. Interferes with your pheromones and stuff like that. But yeah, they can be hormone disruptors. Anyway, so that's one reason. It could be chi stagnation. One reason could be blood deficiency. And that stress response reason is actually probably more of like what we would say in Chinese medicine of like disrupting the connection between the heart and the kidney. And you might think, well, the cycle's got nothing to do with your heart and kidney. Like, what are you going on about, Marie? That's a bit strange. So when you have a shock, like something shocks you unexpected news, like, or you're in a really high state of stress, like you've got adrenaline stuff happening in your body as well, and that affects your kidney, you know, in a physical sense. In Chinese medicine, shock and fear affects your kidney, and it kind of like scatters that energy. So there's just less resource, which would be the underlying resource for the blood. So if someone has a tendency to be blood deficient, then they could probably more easily get affected by emotions like that to stop the cycle versus someone who wasn't already blood deficient and then they went through a trauma or something. They might be a bit more resilient to not sort of halt the cycle. Yeah, the other thing that can happen is, what was I thinking? I just lost my train of thought then. But yeah, the cycle relies on, like, the regularity of the cycle relies on the wood element. So that's basically part of the main thing. The first thing that a Chinese medicine practitioner is going to do is want to sort of regulate the liver qi, because if that's going to work, it's the easiest thing. And obviously they're going to try to make the diagnosis in this. Oh, that's what I was thinking of. I said athletes, like, often their cycle pauses, right, when they're really in high intensity trainings. And the reason for this is, and it can sometimes happen for people that are not really like Olympic level athletes, is because when you sweat, in Chinese medicine, they think of sweat as a form of blood, like a lesser form of blood. And you're literally depleting your fluids, your body. So because it's just demanding so much of yourself, it just, you know, puts making the blood of the cycle on hold. So hopefully that answers your question. There's a few different varying reasons for that. So chi stagnation, blood deficiency, some kind of emotional thing could be part of it. If it's blood deficiency, then the general blood deficiency symptoms are things like dry skin, dry hair. The period itself would have been quite scanty at times, or extremely heavy. Now that might sound like a paradox, but extremely heavy periods is the thing that depletes you. So for some people, they just have a lot of what they call flooding, like just lots of bleeding, and it's really heavy. And then one day it's like not doing that and there's just nothing left. Like the body doesn't have the resource. Diet, if you're a vegan or a vegetarian and you've been like that for a long time, or you eat a lot of cold and raw foods, well, your body can sometimes run out of resource to make blood from. It's struggling to keep your body going, so it's going to put the cycle on hold a little bit. Versus cheese. So usually the dry skin is a big part of blood deficiency, like chronically dry skin. Like you'd need to moisturize all the time. You'd just be noticing it, or people would say you've got dry skin. Obviously those things, the dryness of the skin can be worse in winter and not as bad in summer. That kind of stuff's normal. Sleep would be a big part of this. If your sleep isn't great, that's a place you can intervene to help with tonifying blood. So sleep and diet. You can take blood tonic herbs. You can go and see your herbalist and get blood tonic herbs. Cool. I just made this carnivore cheesecake That's what I'm eating just before I started this stream. I've never made it before. And it's literally just eggs and Philadelphia cheese. So it's obvious. They call these things cheesecake, but it's like savoury. It's not a cake. It tastes good still. Yeah. Anyway, cool. All right. What else are we doing here? Any other questions? Do people have other questions? There's also a herbal formula that you can use, that you can buy from Chinese food shops. It's called Superchats. I'm writing it in the chat because you won't be able to get that. Try hazarding that out for yourself. Or one herb. I'll write that down. That's 4 herbs. It's like a soup pack of herbs, right? Or dangwei. The other blood tonic herb that's used in TCM a lot is the goji berries, right? Gochidza. At the start of this stream, I was talking about blood tonic things being red and berries and stuff, and I forgot to mention the good old goji berries. So you don't want to eat too many of those things because they're quite, they've got quite a strong flavour. But just including that in your diet, can be good. So what you do with this suwultang, or the dangwei, so the dangwei's in the suwultang, it's 4 herbs in there, is you just get those herbs which are sort of not sticky as in sticky, but they're sticks, right? And you either boil that up as a soup. So what you probably just try to reduce it by half. So let's say you put a liter of water in the pot and you reduce it down to 500 mils. You take all the sticks out, and then you've got a stock, and then you can add your veggies and your stuff into that, or you can keep on boiling all your veggies and everything with the herbs and then just take the herbs out. You can't eat the herbs at the end. Now, I used to do that when I was a vegetarian. I used to cook that stuff up all the time because I was constantly told by my Chinese medicine doctors and teachers and whatnot, oh, you're going to be unhealthy being a vegetarian. And I was like, no, I'm not. Now I'm a carnivore. I had to puzzle that out. But I was like, I'm never going to eat meat. And I didn't have anything wrong with me, but I was very young. And I just thought this would be healthy. This would be good, right? So that's what I used to do. And I used to just boil that soup up and make it once a week. So you put your veggie stock in it and you boil it all up. Now, the only downside of those herbs is one of the herbs, shu di, in there is black. It's just going to darken everything. So if you're making a lovely pumpkin soup, it ends up looking this sort of dirt color in there. It's still healthy and tastes really good for you. But if you're serving that up to other people and they're like, what is this thing you're giving to me? Marco says, can we use goji berries as a monotherapy, just by itself? I don't think goji berries are really that strong by itself. When we're talking about tonifying blood, you have to think about how did that person get to that place of being blood deficient. So like a handful of goji berries here or there, I don't think that's going to solve the problem for them because they got blood deficient somehow. So this is really the key of it, right? So if the cause of the problem is still ongoing, and we don't address that cause, it's like a leaking sieve. You're not going to ever plug up that hole. So you might need a lot of intense herbs or herbal treatment and foods to help that. Now, if the problem has stopped happening, so when would the problem not be there? I'm just going to put that question on the screen so if people jump in, they know what we're talking about. I'm just removing this image. If you lost a lot of blood from something, okay, like you had an accident and you had a lot of bleeding, or some people can get blood deficient after a surgery. You know, you're recovering from an illness. It's also part of that illness recovery, and then you've had, you know, surgery is very damaging because it's very cold in the operating theatre, right? So let's assume you're not having any more surgeries and we're just recovering from that thing, and you're not a vegan or a vegetarian. So yeah, you can probably supplement it, and then one day you'll be fine. You'll be back to normal. So like the Chinese medicine is based on this premise that your body's a self-regulating system. It shouldn't have to have herbs forever, but that's based on a diet that's optimal for you. And for most people, you're better off with something like high quality meat and bone broth and collagen than something like goji berries. So you could use some goji berries, but yeah, I mean, you'd have to eat so many goji berries that you'd be getting the runs from them. Like you'd be getting diarrhea from it. I don't think that would be good. You'd be booing out the goji berries. Something that I've been thinking of a lot lately with like thinking of like especially this answer I was asked about before with blood deficiency and iron. I was just answering a comment from another video. It's like the nature of the foods in terms of are they cold, are they warm, that makes a big difference as well. Now goji berries are just like a bland nature. They're not warm, but most meats are warm. So that increases their ability to tonify yang because they've also got life force in them. And that's a massive part of it, right? Now, goji berries have a life force in them too. But you're probably better off picking them and eating them straight away because the freshness will be there. My friend grows them in Queensland. I don't think they can grow that well in WA where I live because it's probably too dry here. But yeah, you can buy them. And yeah, so all these things I've mentioned, the suwal tang, the dungwei, these herbs, yeah, they're all available in Chinese grocery stores. So you just need to go down the aisle and be a bit inquisitive and have a look for them. So if you put those things into, I can't type Chinese on here because I don't have a computer that can type Chinese, but I could write the characters for dungwei, but I can't type it. But I'm going to copy this here and see if I can put this in here. Because I don't know where you personally live, and not asking you to tell me that. But when I've gone to Chinese food shops, sometimes they just don't understand your accent or how you're saying it or something like that. So if I just get this, you can sometimes tell them in Chinese, right? I just copied that off there. So that whole dungwei is used to tonify the liver, promote blood, blah, blah, blah. Don't forget about that, but just copy the character, that dungwei, right? And just ask for that. Now it's super common. That's one of the most common Chinese herbs. It'd be really common that they had that. And they might have it in a pack with some other herbs. Like if you're just having it as a soup, it might be fine. You could just Google it, see what those herbs do, give them a try. The other thing that your question reminds me of, this monotherapy thing, is the quantity of herbs as a food versus the quantity of herbs as a medicine. So I don't use goji berry in my formulas like it is in some herbal formulas, but it's actually in Chinese medicine much more used as a food than a herb. Okay, so it is a herb, but it's more commonly like just a superfood, what Chinese would call a superfood. So we'll use a different example. We'll use the dungwei, for instance, right? So in a herbal formula, the prescription, if someone had a blood deficiency and we were using dungwei to treat them, for one, it wouldn't just be one herb. It's never going to be just dungwei. It'd be 6 herbs, dungwei sinitang, dungwei xiaoyaosan. There's a couple of dungwei based formulas, right? So in those formulas, the dungwei would be like 9 grams or 12 grams every day. That like the daily dose of that dungwei, which it would be like a small handful, like that much. 12 grams of dungwei would just be what would fit, closed up. It would fit in my hand like that, right? And when you have these foods as an everyday food, or you're having it you're putting it in your soup, you probably, let's say you do use 9 grams of dang gui, but you're not eating all that soup. You're feeding that soup to your family, to other people maybe, right? Or having it over, like you just can't, what I'm saying is you can't consume like a big pot of soup, of vegetable soup or chicken soup. You don't consume that all in one day. You're going to freeze some and eat some different days, or different people are going to eat some. Whereas when you're using something as a medicinal substance and a herbalist is prescribing it to you, the dose would be that 9 or that 12 grams every day. So you'd boil it up and drink, and it would condense down, so you would be extracting all this nutrients and stuff and the goodness from that herb every day. And you'd be doing that for days and days and days and days. So if you've got blood deficiency and you're treating it with herbs, you're going to be treating it for at least, a month, maybe 2-3 months. Like if it's a cycle-related problem, you need to take the herbs for 3 months at least before you're going to really see a significant difference. Now, if it's just something that acutely happened, people can get into a blood deficiency scenario from something acute, but that's still quite a serious scenario to be in, right? Now, if you just get a cold or a flu, that's acute. You don't take the herbs for months and months. You just take the herbs for, a week or a few days and you feel better. And you might not need that formula anymore, especially if you get it straight away. But we're talking about people who've got stuff that's really long standing. So I'm trying to help people to, like on this channel, to help you do the things you can do for yourself, because obviously you want to do the self-help stuff, and also to help you understand what is the role of a practitioner, how they could help you, because you're paying good money for that stuff. You want to know what it's actually doing, what's the difference between what they're doing and what you can do. So Chinese medicine is best placed in the self-help stuff is to prevent, right? So let's say you don't have blood deficiency, and the best time to use goji berries as a monotherapy is when you don't have blood deficiency, to prevent getting blood deficiency, right? you're going to go for a surgery or something. You try to, you try to use diet and lifestyle to make your body healthy rather than treat it. Once a disease has happened, once a disease process has started, or there's already lots of symptoms and things like that there, you could use foods as the therapy, but you need to commit to over a long period of time. And you also, if you are taking these things over a long period of time and in a fairly high dose, you also need to make sure that that is the right thing for you, which is better to have the practitioner's guidance, because you don't want to eat a bag of goji berries every day just for no reason. Like if you don't need it, you're going to be also pushing a lot of nutrients and things through your body that it might not need, substances it might not need. So if you're using things I've kind of said two things at the same time, right? On one hand do this, and the other hand do the opposite of that. So yeah, you could use it, as part of your diet, but I don't think goji berries all by themselves are going to treat blood deficiency. What is good about them is they're quite sweet tasting. They're not sugary sweet, but they're quite palatable as a herb. And if you eat fruit and nuts as a thing, you eat sultanas, just change the sultanas to goji berries. That's a better thing to do. That kind of stuff, right? Yep. All right. If people have other questions, feel free to ask them. We've got one here about dairy. Yeah, look, dairy is something that is a bit of a strange food, because it's only in Western cultures that we really have so much dairy. The Chinese have dairy in their culture now, but they didn't always. They didn't. It's not something that they've always had. So it's very new, and I think you're going to notice maybe more diseases or lifestyle factor issues happening because of dairy in the Chinese population, maybe in years to come, that we haven't noticed before. So like a good example was when I first went to China in 2001. I took my own milk. My teacher said to me, "You can't get coffee in China, just letting you know. You can't get cheese." And he said, sometimes I go to China, I bring a block of cheese with me. I was like, what? Like, if you're going to be there, like, it's not like you need the cheese. Like, you have to have cheese. But he's like, if you like cheese, you know, he was preparing me because I was going to be there for 3 months. And I was only 21 when I went to China. I was pretty young. And I loved coffee. So I brought my own coffee. I brought this little percolator thing, like this little thing that I could sieve it through in the hotel room, or I was staying in one of the hospital accommodations for a while there. And I brought my own powdered milk, massive bag of powdered milk. I think that's what I had. And just in case, right? No one likes powdered milk. Anyway, there was milk available there. Like there was lots of milk, but like the milk there just made me sick. I don't know what it was. I think someone said they don't homogenize or they don't pasteurize milk there. I mean, since then, some debacles have come out where they've put melamine in the milk and different things like that. And that's why not just Chinese, but it's mostly people from China. They really buy up a lot of Australian milk products and send it back to their families over there because they worry about their kids, right? Especially if they need formula. There's just not good quality. So all that aside, right? It's just not part of the culture. They just did not drink teas and coffees. And I remember when the first Starbucks opened up there, I was lining up out the front like it was when the Starbucks in Hangzhou opened. Now there's Starbucks everywhere and there's coffee everywhere. And then the last few times I went there, they have it at the, like, you'd stay at an expensive hotel and they would probably have coffee there, but it wouldn't be common. And you'd stay at a 4-star hotel and there'd be no coffee. You just wouldn't be able to get coffee. Now you can get really good coffee at most hotels. They just have it. So the Chinese are into it. But what I mean by coffee is tea, coffee, milk, and these milky breakfasts and, cereal breakfasts. And they've gone all down the Western Road in terms of what's available. Now there's lots of Chinese that I've seen in China when you go to hotels and stuff. They still will eat the Chinese breakfast. They'll still eat a very Chinese way. But many of them will just eat what they call it American breakfast, but it's really just a Western breakfast, right? I mean, for someone like me, we'd just call it English breakfast. If you were talking to my nana, she would be wanting you to acknowledge the heritage of the English contribution to tea with milk. What I'm getting at is, it's just none of the Chinese diet books include dairy products. They just weren't part of it. And so I think it's all the symptoms and the things, like there's all the recipes that are used don't have dairy in them. So they were not cooking with dairy. They were not using it or eating it, consuming it. Certainly didn't have cheese like as a snack, right? This whole snacking on cheese and stuff like that. So I think there's several issues with dairy for people now. One is, and this is, just part of the food chain, like the quality of the commercialization of the cows and, all that and what they're fed and, can often has caused people to have issues, and they think that they're lactose intolerant, but when they change to something like A2 milk, often those lactose intolerant symptoms go away. Now, there are also people who are lactose intolerant, and a lot of dairy is, what's the nature of dairy in Chinese medicine? It's sweet. It's a sweet flavour. It's carbohydrate, right? Now, if you have cheese, hard cheeses, there's not many carbs in the hard cheeses, but in milk, there's carbohydrate. And, that for some people that can cause them, issues like they would with like the sweet flavour overwhelming the spleen and making them phlegmy. I think there's not enough people that have tested, is it the dairy or is it something else? So like I just noticed this from doing the carnivore diet, people that have people so often will report, this is just anecdotal self-reporting, that if they have dairy in a carnivore diet, they're okay. And usually people who have dairy in a carnivore diet, they're not having tons of dairy, most people, unless they're just starting out and they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. You're not supposed to have a whole platter of cheese and, lots and lots of dairy, but they include it in their diet and they will have it. Or like a treaty sort of occasional food that you're having it. One is you're not having a lot of the sweeter dairies. So, yogurt that's just plain without any sweetening in it, and all the additives and stuff like that is part of, making it really not great, and it's going to raise your blood sugar as well. Cheeses and stuff like that have bits of fruit in it and things like that. Like, that's all different. It's going to act on your body in a different way. But what I was trying to say is that if you're on a carnivore diet or let's say a keto diet and you're having cheeses, you're going to act on your body differently, dairy there, than if you have just a general run-of-the-mill diet with lots of carbs and you have dairy. Often those same people would say, well, I would have felt phlegmy before, but now I'm not feeling phlegmy, or dampening, like the foggy-headed, cloudy-headedness. So I think it's got to do with the sweetness of the dairy as well. There's also good reason to just cut it out of your diet. Like, you don't need it. You don't need dairy products. Like, it's a lie that they've told us. When I was a kid, they used to have all these ads on TV saying you need 3 serves of dairy a day to get strong, healthy bones. And that's a lie. You don't need 3 serves of dairy a day to get strong, healthy bones. You do need calcium, but there's lots of ways you can get calcium. So how do they get calcium for kids in Chinese medicine? The most common way is chicken broth, chicken stock. Like, you basically cook the chicken carcass, the bones of the chicken, boil that, and that's going to extract the calcium out of the bones. And then you use that stock to cook a bit of rice, and then you're making a little congee for the kids. I'm talking about weaning foods, like first foods that kids are fed. That's one of the first foods that they should eat is chicken broth, and those sort of things. Anyway, happy days. Any other questions that people have? Get rid of this little fly in here, something, little bug, little moth. It's so small I can't see it, but I can see it. It's so weird. I'm sure it's a little moth. Yep. If people have a question, then you feel free to ask the question in the chat. Is there any researchers that suggest the right combination for dairy products? I'm not sure about that. I'd have to look that stuff up. It'd be an interesting thing to look up. And you could just start yourself on Google Scholar and have a look. You could just look up maybe the effects of dairy in a keto diet versus a non-keto diet. I did read this research book once by this lady called My Life in Your Hands, I think her book was, and it was really, really interesting. I'm typing that in the wrong place. I'm just going to see if I can find the book to because it's a research. She was a researcher, and she had breast cancer herself, I think, and she was looking into breast cancer and looking at demographics in different countries. Now, this was written about 2006. Just going to see if I can find it. Yeah, it is called My Life in Your Hands, and it's got a red cover, and it's the lady's going like this over her breasts. Professor Jane Plant. Now, one of the interesting things she found, this is just me recalling from reading the book. I did own this book. I don't know if I still have it or not, but I remember reading it. And one of the things she found, or like in the demographic research, was that there's a higher incidence of breast cancer in countries where they do have dairy. Prevalence. Prevalence means like the amount of people in the country that have it. Incidence is the new cases, the number of new cases. So it's more prevalent in Scotland was the highest, and 2 parts of rural China were the lowest, and then Japan. So this was around the 2006. Now, what the story I told you about being in China and not being able to find milk and dairy and stuff, that was 2001. So I'm not sure exactly when this. So it was around the same time. So it would have been, I'm sure if you looked at provinces in China now, you'd have to go very, very rural to find somewhere where they don't have any dairy, or it's just not available. Now, there are places like that. I've been to a few different places that are super rural, and they don't let foreigners stay there. We were only allowed to go there for like a day trip, like come in and come out. And there was no shops there. There was just nothing there. As in, people just are living off what they grow and the animals that are there. And it's very natural and healthy. But it's not like there's a McDonald's there or anything like that. So, this book had that. So she was kind of saying, look, well, just from that alone, that's not saying that dairy's the only thing, but she was like, what's the difference between... So Scotland has the highest consumption of dairy per capita in the world, apparently, in Scotland. And, these rural places in China plus Japan, certain places in Japan that she'd mentioned, they have really low dairy. Now, there's other things that are the case for those countries as well, right? Like your life in rural China is completely different to your life in Scotland. Stresses, what you're doing, you're going to be probably more active, and you're probably going to be working to the bone in a physical labor job in one place, and then maybe just sitting around a lot in another place. So these kind of studies are not always that predictive, but she mentioned that in the book too. She wasn't just saying, oh, that's all that it, that's the only conclusion. But it was really interesting. And a part of the two kind of cancers I remember, I'm just going to put the book name there so you can kind of read that if you want to have a look at it. And it's not a Chinese medicine book. It was just kind of, a Western medicine book. She was kind of also saying that it was prostate cancer and breast cancer that she was kind of looking at in this book as the countries of prevalence of those cancers in those countries. Anyway, interesting. That's all. That's something that does come to mind. Yeah. So, but we can definitely have a correlation in Chinese medicine between dairy and dampness. And there's a correlation between dampness and masses and tumours and lumps and lymphomas and cancer things. So what does that mean? It means that cancers and any types of cancers, even if it's a blood cancer or a mass or a tumour or a lump, those things all belong to too much yin without enough yang to transform it. So not enough function. If your body was completely operating at its optimal level, it would have noticed that cells shouldn't have been there, and it wouldn't have kept on letting them duplicate, and it would have got rid of them. So at a very, very basic level, Western doctors agree with that premise as well, right? They're like, okay, everyone has got the potential. They don't call it cancer, but it's like you've got abnormal cells growing in you all the time, but your body detects that and gets rid of it. So got this surveillance system that kind of does that. And that in itself is yang transforming the yin, right? Your body goes round and it cleans up. Like think of it as the garbage truck, like going around the street every day, and it picks up the garbage and throws it out. Every week when your bin's allowed to go out, it gets emptied. Now, if it doesn't get emptied, it very soon just builds up, right? So there's no function. The garbage truck is the yang, the function, and then all the garbage is building up, right? And it's causing a structural change there, right? If you've got a big rubbish pile on the side of the road where your bin should have been emptied for after 2 or 3 weeks, that's not great. So, yeah, we kind of think of masses and accumulations in that way, and dampness is a yin substance. So I'm not saying that dairy causes cancer. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that there's that the way we think about it it's a correlation between those things. So that's why I think the dairy that you have, the diet you already have influences what those new foods, or those, let's say, the foods that we're going to talk about, what they do. Which makes it quite a nuanced and complicated discussion to talk about things, because there are some foods that are really, like, they do that function, they do that thing no matter what. But there's some foods that they do more of that thing given a certain environment. They tend to proliferate more negative effects for you, or potentially less negative effects for you. Like I said, if people are eating a lot of carbs and sugar and then they have dairy, they might think the dairy is making me phlegmy. But if they didn't have the carbs and the sugar and they had the dairy, they may not also feel phlegmy. I mean, literally they feel their nose, phlegmy. And it's also volume. It's a volume thing. Like one glass of milk, one coffee, maybe it's okay. If you had 3, like your body's had enough of that for that day and it's maybe going to, give you phlegm. Awesome. Oh, good to see you, artist Sia. Haven't seen you for a while, I don't think. Maybe I have and I forgot. But if people have a question, please put that into the comments in the chat. That's what the stream is for, the answering of the questions. So I hope everyone's doing well. And let me know where you're tuning in from. Where in the world are you from? So just going to have a look here if I've got any other things to kind of go through. Other questions? Cool. So Marco says, thanks for the info. Do you recommend any university or academia for a few months and studying and practice in China? That's a good question. I don't, I'm just going to copy your question onto here. I don't have any affiliations with any places in China. I'll tell you where I studied and I had a great time. And I'll give you some tips about what to do when you organise it. Some of those tips are just because what my teacher told me. So there's what country are you in for now? Like where are you now? That's probably, you don't have to tell me your exact location, but like, are you in the US? Are you in Australia? Are you already in an undergraduate program? That's probably going to be important. Like, are you already in a university studying? Are you already a practitioner? Do you want to study Chinese medicine? That's probably a lot of questions. Have you started studying Chinese medicine already, or are you just wanting to start studying it from scratch? So there are programs in China, universities, that teach you Chinese medicine from scratch, and you'll get your degree. Oh, cool. You're already in your 3rd year, right? You'll get your degree in China. You probably don't want to do that. It's all in Chinese, right? So your own school is probably the best place to ask. What country in Europe are you in? Are you in Spain or... because I know there's some places. I have a colleague in Spain, and she was saying was telling me how difficult it was just to practice. Yeah, Greece, right? That's super unfortunate. Like this colleague was telling me, I think Greece is very similar to Spain, where there's all these restrictions and stuff, and you sort of have to do it under the table, almost under the hat. But it's weird. So congratulations on doing the course. That's awesome that you've started the journey. It's a great profession. Like, it's a really good profession, and I think it does help going to China. Like, that helped me a lot. It helped me a lot with confidence when I was first practicing, because patients come in and they say, "Oh, have you treated this? Have you treated that?" And you haven't. You've just learnt about it in a book, and you've done some things in your student clinic, but you can never see every type of condition. Now, when you've gone to China, you've participated in those treatments in some instances. Like, you've actually helped out with doing the acupuncture sometimes, or you've just watched it, or and you can at least say to those, "Oh, I've seen those kinds of cases in the hospital that I worked in China," and that's great. And that's the money I paid to go to China was probably worth it just for that. It really helped me with that. And also it helps a bit with the legitimacy when people ask you, "Oh, did you have to study to do Chinese medicine?" And you're like, "Yeah, I did. It was very bloody expensive and long-winded and a proper degree." And then and you're like, oh, and I went to China and I worked in a hospital for a few months there, and they're like, oh wow, you know, like you must be really into it. Like, yeah, well, I just said I like it's my job, it's my profession, right? Anyway, there's just, you're met with varying responses from people. Some people think, wow, it's so amazing. But for many years, a lot of people just used to say, oh, what, you know, what is that? Just such a weird, you know, response. Anyway, it's just also because of ignorance. People just don't know, right? It's not their fault they don't know. And that's one of the reasons why I make this channel. So we can spread the good word of how great it is. Anyway, yeah, so when contact your school. Now, a lot of schools don't do trips to China anymore because of insurance reasons. They just don't want to get involved in it. In the school where I was in, it was almost like we were told you were going to get some kind of credit for it, but it wasn't actually getting the credit for it. We already got our degree regardless, but we were sort of really encouraged to go. And it was a bit of, you know, the degree I studied in was a bit flexible when it started. Just changed a lot. They were still accredited and everything, but it was just, anyway, it was a bit of a different time back then. Some colleges, like universities in Melbourne, in Melbourne and Sydney, I'm sure that they used to have a program as part of the thing where you could go, like instead of doing, you know, 6 months of student clinic, you could spend 3 months in China working in a hospital, and that would count towards your hours, right? Your clinical hours. Just a lot of colleges just don't do that anymore, right? Because it's a big liability to take on, right? To be to say you're doing a tour there and you're supposedly taking responsibility for people, and yeah, inevitably stuff happens and people say, oh, well, I paid you the money and I didn't have a good time. And, you know, when you take a group of students there, it's a really great experience going with a group of people because you build bonds in that environment that you wouldn't have otherwise. But no teacher or supervisor or whatever can actually, you know, you're all adults as well, but they can't, you know, it's like being on school camp for 3 months. Like you can't look after these, you know, be responsible for that. And there's just a lot of liability now, risks that people just won't take. Schools won't take it. Plus maybe a teacher doesn't want to go and live in China for a month with the students. And what used to happen before was sometimes the teacher would go over with the students for the first week and then just leave them there because they're adults and they can work it out for themselves, right? But you'll also have a really good experience, or you can have a really good experience just by yourself because you're going to nut it out by yourself. And that's what happened to me. I was there by myself. I had a map. The hospital person looked after me quite well. Like, you know, she was very supportive in her own way. And I just had to fend for myself for most of the stuff, right? But China is a different place now, and it's much easier to get around without knowing Chinese, right? When I first went there, you could not speak any English to hardly any people, that like as in people you met off the street. Like a lot of people were desperate to learn English, and I would just people would come up upon you to sort of be your friends and hang out with you, and I made a lot of Chinese friends that way. And because I went by myself, none of my colleagues one of my students, friends who graduated wanted to go at the same time, I went by myself. And I made friends with people that, you know, other practitioners from America and different countries that were there. Yeah, so there's two roughly that I know of ways you can go to China, two kind of scenarios I saw people do. Now, I'm not sure what they do now, but it's probably the same. There's these tour groups. So Cafe Herbal used to run these tours where they would take you around from hospital to hospital, department to department. You'd see a lot of stuff. So you might go to all these different hospitals in different days, and then you'd also get on this bus and you'd go to the Great Wall and you'd go here and you'd see that. And it was like 3 weeks of stuff. But those students did not learn any Chinese medicine while they were there. They would come into the hospital. There would be a big group of them, like 12 or so, and that's a lot in China when it's already very busy. And they would come in and they would register with the hospital. They'd get their white coats and they'd come in and they'd sort of be hovering around trying to learn something because they were doing in the herbal department for like 2 days. And then they'd come into the acupuncture department. They'd be there for a few days, and you could see that this actually just annoyed the main doctor. I could see that. Like I'm a pretty perceptive person, and I couldn't speak any Chinese, but I could see that These other doctors were getting annoyed by this. If you spend a month in one department, you will get to know that doctor and you'll get to know some of the patients, and then they will let you do some treatment. These other people were not given treatments to do. Some of the UK people I met that were there, they were given treatments to do, like as in they were given some needles and said to go and needle these patients. But because you're there, like you need to be there in the same one department for a month. So don't be there for less than that time. I just don't think you're going to have a good experience if you go there. Like if you don't have the money to go there for a month, wait until you do. At least. I went for 3 months. Now, also another thing when you go to China is it's very common to get sick with a flu or a cough. Like you're just not used to the weather. You're not used to the pollution. And if you're only there for 3 weeks and one of those weeks you're sick, you're just not going to have a great experience, right? So you're just going to be sort of, you know, maybe you have to stay in bed a day or something, or you just, you know, not feeling your best, or you're not going to be able to go out on the weekends that weekend. So yeah, you could probably go online and look for hospitals in different provinces, different places. One of the places I would recommend is Hangzhou, because that's where I went. It's one of the most expensive, I've written it in the chat there, one of the most expensive cities in China now, but it used to be a cheap place. But it's one of the most beautiful places. And a lot of people go there for Chinese medicine. It's very well known for Chinese medicine. They've got one of the hospitals there that I went to is called the Hangzhou Shizhong Yiyuan. I'll put that in the chat. I'm not sure. I don't know anyone there now, so you'd have to just Google it and look it up. And they would have a person that speaks English that you can contact and just find out. And you usually pay them for the time, right? You pay, and the payment includes a translator, or you're with a doctor who speaks English. And so what you'll do is you'll go there and they'll say either like, do you want us to help you organise the accommodation, or do you want to do that yourself? Now there's a lot more freedom in terms of where you can stay. Like there's Airbnbs you can do in China. One of the good things about China is the living is very cheap if you don't mind living cheaply. So you can still get chicken and rice with some bok choy for like 10 yuan, which is $2.50 or $3 Australian, right? You can still get those meals if you want to eat off the street, a little cart. If you eat McDonald's, or not that you should, but some people when they travel, they eat that stuff, it'll be the same price as what you pay in your country. It's expensive. That sort of food is expensive. But for the most part, the food is pretty nice, and you'll find some places that are cheap to eat, and it'll be good. And it won't be, the food is not that expensive. The accommodation, if you don't mind staying in a really, if you're going on the cheap, you can find some really cheap hotels, is what I'm saying. You can get a bicycle and you can cycle around. You can also, a lot of the cities have a really good metro train sort of system, and you can kind of go by the train. The best advice I could give you when you go in the hospital is to pay attention to whatever the doctor tells you and actually do that thing. So they might be testing you, which they probably are. Like, you know, if they say, oh, you should be practicing your needling on a little cushion, and they give you a little cushion and you don't do that, they're not going to give you any other things to try. They're going to come back and see if you're doing that. So just, you have to keep doing that all day long. When I did Twainer, they asked me to just do this rolling, like that's rolling. So I was sort of rolling. You can't see that because of this question up here, but let me put that there. So this is rolling, right? I was sort of doing this on a rice bag, and I was doing that rolling all day on the same rice bag till my hands were bleeding. And then the doctor comes in, like, so he'd left the room, he'd gone somewhere, he'd given me this rice bag to roll, and he's like, do this. He showed me how to learn how to do the rolling, and I'm like, okay, I'm learning the rolling, I'm doing it. And you know, now I'm really good at the rolling because I fucking practiced it a lot. So if they give you something to do, you better do it. And then he was like, okay, he goes, are your hands sore? I was like, yeah. And he goes, and they weren't bleeding, but they were like cracking. Right? And it was a little bit. The next day it was like pretty rough. It all come good, right? Rolling is a type of Chinese massage. So this is one of the techniques that's used, like Tui Na, right? If you're learning acupuncture, part of acupuncture is Chinese massage or Tui Na, and rolling, and you have your rolling, your one finger digitation. These are all techniques like that are used. So that's what rolling would sort of look like if I was kind of doing it on myself like that. And you're sort of going, you're using your knuckles as sort of, anyway, it's a very specific way of how to do it. So I learned that in China. I did the Tui Na for I did Tui Na for 1 month. I did herbs for 1 month. I did acupuncture department for 1 month. And I did, I had a couple of extra weeks within that. So I did the gynecology department, which is a herbal medicine department only, for 1 week. And I did dermatology, which is a herbal medicine department, for 1 week. So what's great about going to China as an acupuncturist is you will see the distinction as to what is actually treated with acupuncture versus what's treated with herbs, and you'll probably be surprised that if someone's got fertility stuff, they don't treat them with acupuncture. If someone's got a stroke, they don't treat them with herbs. They might use herbs, but they primarily use acupuncture. If someone's had any sort of musculoskeletal things, a broken leg, they're going to do traumatology and acupuncture kind of treatment. With the Tui Na, the Chinese massage, like one of the guy that I was studying with, he would take me to his hospital rounds, or the ward rounds, and there were some people that were getting Tui Na after surgery, like for recovery and rehabilitation, and it's just really cool. There's all kinds of stuff that they're going to do. So yeah, it's really good to kind of do that. So good luck with your journey of your study. So you just need to go and find out. Do they usually? I'm just reading your question. Do they usually ask for previous experience or studies? Look, I don't know. My teacher organised it for me, so he had already been going to this hospital quite a lot, and he had relationship with them. And that in Chinese culture, they call that guanxi, which is like, I know you, you know me, like the relationship thing. And that is important. Like if there's someone that can introduce you, that's why I was saying talk to your school. If there's a teacher that's gone to China before that knows of a contact and they can introduce you, that will definitely go a massive long way. When I got to the hospital, the doctors I had to teach me, to shadow, to watch them, they knew my teacher. And when didn't know any Chinese at that time, and then I could hear them say, "Oh, you're so-and-so student," and they were like, "Ooh," like, because they knew that my teacher was really good. They were very respectful of that scenario, and that went a long way to before we'd even started, right? The second thing that really helped was that I could write in Chinese, and it might be a big stretch to write in Chinese for you, but like I can't write everything in Chinese, but I could write the Chinese herbs in Chinese. And as soon as they saw me do that, they were like, "Ooh," like, look at they were pointing me out to their other friends. Now I can't write all the herbs in Chinese now. I've forgotten it because I don't use it all the time, but I used to use it all the time because my teacher made us write all the herbs in Chinese characters when we first studied it, and told us if you want to be a good practitioner, you have to do this. And I was like, okay, well, I better learn how to do this, and I just started doing it. So yeah, now because of our Chinese medicine board, it has to be in English. So I could write it in Chinese, but I just haven't kept that up, and we've moved on from there. Maybe I need to start doing that again, just as a little practice thing. Yeah, they do say the points by the names. And the other thing is, if you can only use tubes, boo, that's not very good. So there were some English students there when I was there, and those students had never needled without tapping it in with the tubes. And they were sort of like, there were no tubes given to them. They were just given, like, literally there was a patient that had come in regularly this is how it happened for me. And he said, "Oh, do you remember this patient?" Like, and I'm sort of just every day, I was writing things down in my little book. Every time a patient came in, I had a little book and I was writing down the case and what points they use, because you're trying to remember and learn and all this stuff, right? So they can see that you're keen if you're writing that stuff down and you're actually paying attention. And then sometimes in between the patients, you can ask the doctor some questions and you might say, oh, remember that patient that came in before? Why did you use that point and not that point? And that sort of shows them that you're sort of, the names aren't impossible to remember. I know the point names more than I know the numbers, because I was told to do that. And what you should do is every time you needle that point, you say the name and the number. And if you make the name mean something to you, like I was talking to my students recently, there's another way to remember them, maybe little songs. Sometimes that helps me. To sort of remember what they mean. But like if you actually, if you know what if the Chinese means something to you, then it will be more meaningful. So you sort of need to know the number, the name in Chinese, and then what that name means in English. So then it's going to mean something, and it'll actually make learning the points easier for you rather than harder, right? Because, well, I'm a pictorial sort of learner. So for instance, we had a point that we're talking about. I was teaching my class this week, and it was something about the eyes and eye disorders, conjunctivitis, or some kind of eye things, and we're going through points that we could use. And I said, there's a point on the gallbladder channel that could be used for this. And, then the thing that reminds me of that point is I said, this song, like, turn around. One of the students goes, bright eyes. All right. So the point's called bright eyes, or bright, Guan Ming, gallbladder 37, right? Bright, I think it's called bright light. But I remember that song with that point because it brightens the eyes. That's one of the things it does. It benefits the eyes, and Ming is like brightness, light. Guang Ming, bright eyes, right? So not every point's going to have a song to it, but that's how I remember herbs. I have little songs for formulas that I sing to myself. So whatever, if you already know some piece of knowledge, you kind of attach it to that. So it's kind of a Bob Flores method of learning. He says that, and I read it once in one of his books, and he was like, every time you say the point, you say the number and the name every time. And my teacher used to say, every night before you go to bed, which one is it? I'm not sure what do you mean which one is? I'm not sure what that last question means. Every time you go to bed, you say the name. You say the point number. Oh, gallbladder 37. Guan Ming. Yeah. Before you go to bed, you go through one channel a night, and to memorize where the points are, you point to the point, you say the name and the number, and you go through each one. It's easy to go through the ones on the hands because you can kind of see your own hands. Maybe when you get to your back, you might revise it on a sheet or something like that, and maybe you do split the bladder and the gallbladder channel in 2 nights or something. Start at 6 o'clock, so you're not up all night for the gallbladder channel. But you get the idea, right? There's a lot of stuff in Chinese medicine that's just repetition. And if you're in your final year of studying and you're like, well, I've never used these names, the more names you start to use, it's better to use some than none. The college I teach at doesn't require students to learn the names. And I find that like almost a crime against Chinese medicine because, it makes it easy for the students. But it's making a weaker practitioner in the long run. Just that slight little bit of information that they just don't know. I don't know, like there's something, that's just my opinion that I'm not saying they're a weaker practitioner as in they might be a great acupuncturist still, but there's knowledge contained in those names for a reason. Like they're either telling you where the point is or what the point does. There's something about it, right? And some of them have a little story with it. And some people are very story-orientated learners. So you're kind of missing out. And I feel like if you just know the points by their numbers, to me, it's meaningless. It's not an extra. I mean, it is an extra job to do it. But if you were told you have to do it, you just make a way and just find a way. It's like I would have still got my degree if I didn't write the herbs in Chinese. Like, we were never tested on it. My teacher just said, if you want to be a good practitioner, you need to write the herbs in Chinese. So I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to start doing that. And I better do it. And yeah, a lot of people want to do what's needed for passing their exam. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's needed to just be a good practitioner as well. But I'm sure you're also a good practitioner, and you probably will be awesome, especially if you're thinking about going to China and your fellow classmates aren't. It's going to make you stand out from the crowd when you graduated. That's a good thing to do. Yeah. So, if they ask you to do something when you go there, just make sure you do it, even if it seems a bit weird. Even if they ask you to sweep the floor. I mean, I don't think they're going to ask you to do that. But, yeah. And usually what happens is you're working, like, in the hospital in the daytimes. Well, just popping my seat down a bit. And then on the weekends, you're free. So you can kind of take little trips here or there on the weekends. Sometimes they organise trips for you, take you different places. It's really easy to get around China on the high-speed trains these days. You can go to different cities. You can see the sights and stuff like that. If that's kind of what you want to do. I'd been to China more than, I think 10 times before I'd seen the Great Wall of China. Like, I just hadn't even gone to Beijing because it didn't really interest me to just do the standard, stuff. There's so many other interesting things you can do there. Yeah. Anyway, I hope that's helpful to you. I'm pretty sure you'd be able to look up and have a conversation with people online now. There'd be much. I'm sure all those hospitals have a website, but ask the teachers in your school first, because if they've gone to China themselves and they might still know somebody, then they can recommend you. That will definitely go a long way. And just also to note that I just looked up the hospital I studied at, and my own website came up straight away because that's where I'd studied. Let me see this. I was just looking up that hospital to see if I can see it there. They don't have a website just popping right up there. Not looking up that name. There are some hospitals that have specialties in certain things. Like, I was very surprised at this, and a lot of that's Western medicine too. But there was like the Guangzhou Proctology Hospital, like a whole hospital for proctology, right, which is diseases of your rear end. There is a hepatitis hospital, like a whole hospital for hepatitis, and some hospitals are more well known. They might have a centre for something. So if you have a really special interest in something particularly, you could sort of try to Google and look in maybe Reddit and things like that. They might have things like that. Yeah, so that's what you want to do. So yeah, if you can't use if you can only use tubes, that would be a bit disadvantaging. But I'm sure they probably do have. Who knows if they use tubes now? But they didn't have any needles in packets of tubes. They just gave you the needles. I think I didn't finish that story properly, but like what happened to me is I was there for a few days and I was writing everything in this little book, and then this patient comes in and he sort of lies down on his bed, waiting for the doctor to come over. The doctor comes to me and he goes, "Oh, do you remember that patient?" I said, yeah. Like, as in, yeah, I remembered him. And he's like, "Okay." And he hands me the needles, like in the hand. Like, he's just got them in his hand and gives them to me. And he goes, "Okay, you do their treatment then." I was like, well, when I said I remembered them, I meant like, I recognized their face. I didn't memorize every point that they'd had. And that's what, and then at that point, after everything like that, I was like, okay, shit, Marie, he's going to test you on it. And I was like, okay, I'm fumbling through my little book, or I'm going, oh, I think he had this point or that. And that doctor just wanted to see how much attention I was actually paying. And also then they're looking at what you're doing. Like, are you able to needle the patient? I mean, they're testing you out on a patient. Can you if you think you're going to needle her girl, are you going to get it in the right spot? And in that case, I do remember them using names of the points, and they were saying, oh, this point, that point. Some hospitals probably have a lot more foreign students come through, and they're probably those hospitals might be familiar with numbers, right? Point numbers. And this is also, again, probably why schools don't send students to Chinese medicine hospitals anymore as part of the school thing. Because let's say you do your degree and your school says, oh, you don't need to learn the numbers, or the names of the points, right? That's probably what's happened to you. They're like, just learn the numbers, that's fine. You still get your degree. You don't need it. Right. Yeah. Okay, cool. Right. I mean, you don't need it for practice after you graduate. You can still go about your business. No patients are going to ever say, oh, do you know what the point Guan Ming? Can you needle that for me? They're never going to, you're probably never going to have a patient like that. Right. So you go, let's say you do that, and then the school goes, right, as part of your degree, you can go to China, and, you go there, and then you basically feel like you're not treated very well because they realize you can't say you don't know the names of the points. You can understand how students would complain to the school that sent them there and all this sort of stuff. Like, the schools don't really have much control over what happens in that hospital environment. And the way things are today, people complain too much. Like, students probably would complain about that. I can see the complaints now. They just wouldn't tolerate it, right? Or they'd say, like, oh, the toilets were the Chinese toilets, and they weren't sitting. Oh no, I can't squat down and go to the toilet. Well, you'll have to suck it up, princess, and go and do it like that, because otherwise you're going to be wetting your pants, right? I didn't even know. No one prepared me that I needed to bring my own toilet paper. Like, I went in the hospital, they don't provide you toilet paper, and I just was like, oh, okay, what am I going to do here? Like, you've already done it. You've turned around. You're like, and I was with these my first day in the hospital, there were these two American guys that had been there for ages already, and I'm sitting in this dermatology clinic with them, really hot, really, like, I was like sweating, and there was no aircon, and just like, I need to go to the toilet. So I said to them, where's the toilet? And I'm like, oh, it's down there, down the hall. So I just went down there. They knew it was my first day because I'm just looked so green. And I go to the toilet. I pull my pants out. Firstly, I'm like, how do I use one of these toilets? I've never used one of these slit, like, Chinese toilets before. It's a big deal just not to wee on your own pants, right? I achieved that goal. I didn't wee onto my pants. Plus, it's dirty in there. Like, you'd think a hospital toilet would be clean. It's not clean. And then you come out, if you turn around, and it's like, oh, there's no paper. And I was just like, oh, okay. So you sort of have to shake yourself as best as you can and just move on. And so then I come out, I wash my hands. Again, no paper, and they all just rub their back of their jacket to and you see all these girls coming out of the toilet with their white jackets, their white coats, wiping their hands on their white coats to dry their hands from the toilet. And then I come back in the clinic room, and the American guy goes, he leans over to me and goes, were you prepared? And I was like, thanks, buddy. Like, he knew exactly what was going to happen. I was like, no, I was not prepared. Like, with his really American accent. I was like, nah. I said, thank you for telling me. And then he, like, gave me a little packet of tissues or something. He's like, they use these here. And I was like, well, you could have given me them before I went. Anyway, I find, I laugh about that sort of stuff, but I can imagine other people just crying, like, and they'd just be like, take me home, I don't want to be here. And they weren't from my school or anything, they were just from another country, they were on their own trip, right? All right, so we've got one more question. We might not do too many more. I'll probably have to stop soon. Stephanie says, how do you have clients hydrate when they are very damp or cold? Well, we all have to drink water. But the issue with dampness and fluid is basically, let me just put your question on here. Add it in. So when you're drinking water, your body has to transform that water into fluid for it to be used by the body, right? For it to make it be useful to you. So that takes up energy, that takes up yang, it takes up warmth to do that, to transform the water, right? Now, when you've got like a situation of dampness, and particularly cold dampness, then there's usually a lack of that ability for the body to transform the water. So for some people, the common symptom that's said in the TCM text is the person has a thirst for sips. So what that means is they just kind of get the water and they just sip a tiny bit. So they're just literally moistening their mouth, but they're not drinking. They can have a bigger thirst, but that's probably something else. So when you've got a heat condition going on, you generally want to drink much more water, like you're sort of gulping down the water. Or you're very, very dry inside, or dry skin or something like that, then people have a bigger thirst and they tend to. So often that's a symptom of dampness, is this thirst for sips. So it's like, yeah, I want to, like, there's the trigger for drinking happens, but you just don't really drink a lot of water. Just sort of sip it and that's it. That might be your body's mechanism of like, well, we're already full with water here. Don't put any more in. So I usually don't advise people within Chinese medicine to drink excessive amounts of water for no reason, right? Like I don't say, excuse me, I was talking about water's making me thirsty. These pretzels are making me thirsty. What I usually say is, so this is how much water you normally should. This is a 2 litre bottle, by the way, 2.2 litres. That's a normal amount of water to drink a day, right? Unless you're exercising a lot, or you're really, really exercising a lot. That would be the main reason. You could drink more water than that. But in general, or it's very hot and you're sweating and it's summertime and it's the peak of summer and you're hot, you could probably drink a bit more. I'm just going to have to stand up because my back's getting sore on that chair going too long on there. So you just drink how much you need to, right? So we don't think you should drink too much water for no reason. If you're urinating at night, then that's too much water to drink if you're forcing your body to drink a lot more excessive water. I know that's not exactly your question. So I don't ever tell my clients to hydrate themselves. Like, I just don't do that. Just not part of what we do. When you go to a massage therapist, they always say, make sure you drink plenty of water. Look, I advise people to drink water instead of other things. Like, water's the best thing to drink. But your body can comfortably filter 2 litres of water a day, 1,800 mils to 2 litres, maybe a bit more than that. Anything more than that isn't needed, really. You're just weeing it out. So if you're just profusely urinating, then there's no need to do that, right? As in, you're just wasting, you're using more energy actually to do that. Now, there are cases where people might benefit from drinking more water, like forcing it down, depending on their diet. So if they're having a very dry kind of diet, or they're fasting, intermittent fasting, they don't eat much food, because this is based on people eating, moisty kinds of foods. Foods have water in them as well. So if they're not drinking, like I've noticed since I've been doing a carnivore diet, I need to drink much more water than I would have if I wasn't doing that diet. And part of that is also because I'm just not hungry, and naturally my body's gone into like an intermittent fasting. I'm just not hungry in the first thing in the morning, and I probably won't eat until 2:00 in the afternoon. And then I might have another meal at the dinner time, or I might just have a very big meal at sort of 3:00, something like that. And that might be all that I have. And then something very small at sort of 6. But if I'm eating like that, I definitely need to drink more water through the day, right? Especially if you're not because you're not snacking or having any other things. But if people are eating a lot of other foods, they're having fruit, they're having carbs like bread or any kind of rice or grains, or there's water in those things too, so they're getting the water from that. Yep. So if we just say just drink what you need to rather than force yourself to drink water. It's a bit of a different system in Chinese medicine to other systems, but that thirst for sips is a common symptom of damp cold. And if I'm treating someone, so let's say you're asking me about my client, if I'm treating someone for that damp cold, then they'd be getting herbs or acupuncture. With the acupuncture be moxa as well, because they'd have to if it's cold, to help the yang increase the ability of the function to transform the damp. So as the damp's transforming and they don't have it as much anymore, they might find their thirst increases and they're actually absorbing the water better. I'm not saying they'd get a ravenous big thirst, I've got to drink so much more, but they would just, maybe their thirst would improve. They would find themselves drinking a bit more than they would, and that would also be absorbing into their system better, right? So that's part of it's to do with output of input and output. Now, we don't measure or ask people, how many times do you urinate? Exactly how many liters do you urinate? But if someone's drinking a lot and they're not urinating and they're not sweating, well, where's all that fluid going? That's a big pathology scenario that can happen. Or they're urinating a lot and they're not thirsty, and they're not really drinking much, but they're urinating a lot. There's all different scenarios that can happen like that. Cool. Alrighty. So I think we'll probably just finish that. Oh, you just joined a sauna. Okay. So you must make sure that you close the pores after the sweating with the sauna, because if you don't, you probably are, but some people don't, you just would be wasting a lot more fluid. So you have to be careful that you don't over sweat. Like in Chinese medicine, sweat is a form of blood, a lesser form of blood. So you can sweat to death. That has happened to people. And I'm not sure if you remember, in the olden days, they used to have this disease called consumption, right? They'd be, Johnny's dying of consumption. And you watch these old Western movies, where they'd be shot or they'd be sick, and they'd be just like, Johnny's up there in the sick room, dying, sweating away, sweating to death, because they didn't have antibiotics in those days. And people would be really easily get a fever from an infection and die. And what would happen is they'd get a big sweat. They'd just sweat themselves to death. And because they had no IV antibiotics, IV fluids or antibiotics or both of those things, they just lost more fluids than the body could cope with before their body could overcome the virus or the bacteria or whatever's causing the fever. People would die. So we don't see that much in our society now because of all the wonders of modern medicine. So what was I going to say there? Yes, be careful about not giving yourself a sweating. What you want to do is after you finish the sauna, you jump in the cold plunge or go in a cold shower. If you don't like a cold shower, just go in a normal shower, and then before you finish, just quickly turn it to cold. And it's like, okay, got to get that cold, and it'll just stop all the sweating, and then you won't be, you'll be good. Yeah. You don't want to do an hour of a sauna or whatever time you do in the sauna and then be sweating for the rest of the day, just very mildly, where you're not stopping the sweating. Yep. All right. Good-o. So happy days. We had lots of questions today, which is good. And I'm let me see if when we're gonna do this again. April. So I'm not going to do, I may do one next week in March at this time, because once it gets to April, the whole of April, I won't be able to do this because it's going to be busy for me. I'm going away. It's my birthday. It's my birthday weekend. I'm going away, and then it's Easter. And then it's Anzac Day weekend in Australia. We have Anzac is it's a public holiday, but it's for the the people that died in the wartime public holiday. But what I'm saying is that every weekend there's something on. And I won't be doing any live streams on Friday nights for the month of April, but then I'll probably come back after that. So it's been a good start to the year to kind of do these. But if people are watching this after the stream and they're like, oh, damn, I missed it, and I'll try and do one next week, which would be the 28th. I'll do my best to do that. And and you can always put your questions in the comments, and I'm still going to make the normal videos that I do. And thanks everyone for your interest in Chinese medicine. I really appreciate that. If you're interested in my course that I've got, or not, you won't be interested in my course, but if you're interested in learning more about Chinese medicine, you might be interested in the course. It's called Self-Care with the 5 Elements. There should be a link to that in the description of this video, and it's a great way to get started with acupressure points, with like foods for each element. We relate each element to the seasons. It's a short course. It's not too long-winded, but I've recorded that very specifically. It's not available on YouTube in any other format. Thank you, Ripley. That's lovely for you to say that I'm a good teacher and easy to follow. Sometimes when I'm not getting on a crazy rant. But I've actually gone to the trouble with the course to put like pictures of all the points. I show you how to do the points. There's bonus content in there of like it's like a little bit of a smorgasbord of the self-help for the 5 elements, and there's also like a little workbook that you can do to help you, decide what's going to be the right thing for you. And you could do that course a few times yourself at different seasons in your life. And you're like, okay, now I need to focus on this or that. It's very low cost. It's only $49 Australian, which is probably half of that in the US now. The Australian dollar's tanked to the US. It's about 50 almost. So get yourself a bargain and buy something in Australian dollars before Trump puts a tariff on us for courses. No, so you're just coming over to Australia to buy the course actually when you go onto the website. So there's no tariff on there, but if you want to invest in yourself and learn about that, you can do that course. And you can also send your question you can send it by email if you want, or put the question in any comment on any video. I'm pretty good now. I can really sort of notice when those comments are there. And so if you have an idea for a video or a question or a thing you want to learn about, I am also working on my Chinese diet therapy course. So I ran this about 2 years ago, and I didn't put it up for on demand because I want to just kind of tweak it and make it better. So maybe you guys can tell me if you think this is a good idea, that you'd like to do it. So like what I'm going to do, and a lot of schools don't teach Chinese dietetics anymore. They maybe teach some of it, but they don't teach all of it. And what I'm thinking of, this is the idea I had this week, is as part of the course, I'll create like recipes that you make each week. So when I taught it in person, what I would do is I'd bring all that stuff to the school. Like I'd bring my little slow cooker and some herbs and some foods, and we'd talk about like, okay, we're going to talk about sore throat, and here's all the foods that can treat it, and these recipes that can treat it. And then I'd make something or get the students to make it as part of the class, right? Now, we can't obviously do that on Zoom. You're not going to fly over to Australia and come into my kitchen and do it here. But what I was thinking is I could give you a little shopping list of the fresh things, and then make a little pack where I post to you the herbs that you would use, or might write you a list where you source them. So there's some things like this, the dried herbs, like what I was talking about at the very start of this video about cooking with dang gui. Like cooking with dang gui, what can you do? Like blood tonic, making blood tonic foods. So you would make something every week, and you can obviously eat that food. You can feed it to your family or your cat or whoever you want to feed it to. Hopefully try it yourself. So it'll be pitched for people that are just interested in Chinese medicine, and also for practitioners that want to get into this area of, to learn a bit more about it, for practitioners that didn't learn it at school even, or students. So yeah, if people think that's a good idea and you do a course like that, it'll be 12 or 13 weeks, something like that. The previous one that I did was about 12. I think I did 12 weeks, so 3-hour classes, be all online. And it's kind of, yeah, you learn what the properties of all the foods are, how Chinese medicine thinks about different diets that already exist, in a structured way. So this kind of live stream, I might tell you some of the same information, but it's really ad hoc and it's kind of all here and there, higgledy-piggledy. So these courses that I do, they're very structured. And the self-care for the 5 elements is a really great place to start if you want to look after yourself and find out what are the most important things for that I can intervene in for myself, like to save money on seeing a practitioner or to fill in the gaps between seeing a practitioner if you sort of, wish you could see the practitioner more often, but you can't do it. It's not a replacement for medicine, but it's kind of hopefully will help with that. So yeah, hopefully people are doing well, and I'll do my very, very, very best to do a stream next week. 90% commit to it. Then we won't have one for the rest of April. So thanks everyone for your attention, and I'll see you again on another video.